Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel, wherever you are in the world, and so much love to each and every one of you. I do hope you're doing incredibly well, and that you're relaxing and having a really fabulous time at this time of the year, and that you're keeping lovely and warm. And don't forget to go and get that quintessential drink, whatever it is that you enjoy drinking, whether it's hot or cold, because I've got a lovely story for you tonight. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up, and let's get started with tonight's story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I'd been married to my husband James for over 10 years, so I knew him like the back of my hand. Well, so I thought. But over the last 3 months he'd become increasingly on edge, deep in thought, wrapped up in a faraway world. It seemed like our marriage had taken a hard beating, as my brooding husband was so preoccupied that I hardly got a word in edgeways. He seemed so distracted all the time, as if his conscient mind was otherwise engaged. I might as well have been a fly on the wall, as that was how little attention he directed at me. I didn't take it personally. I knew it wasn't about me. My husband was insanely busy, assiduously hard at work. I had discerned his behaviour to be a little out of character recently. I'd seen how stressed he appeared. His brown eyes looked so haunted, highlighted by the dark circles that announced that sleep had eluded him for quite a while. I assumed he was exhausted, being overstretched by his boss Marcus Sutcliffe, as even after working hours he was tapping away incessantly at his mobile phone, claiming he was communicating with clients after hours, which seemed nonsensical. Sometimes he would still be busying himself on his cell phone in the middle of the night. I could see how worn out and frayed he seemed. It made my blood boil. I mean, the nerve of his boss. Did he not understand that my husband had the right to enjoy a personal life? If Marcus Sutcliffe wanted to work him into the ground, then at the very least he should be paying him overtime. I was about 6 months pregnant, suffering from a barrage of morning sickness, which would afflict me at any time of the day, morning or night. At the time we lived in Seattle, in a relatively decent green leafy neighbourhood, where we rented out a fully furnished, ultra-modern, contemporary semi-detached home. Life was very good. We were looking forward to the arrival of our new baby in 3 months. I was making plans to prepare a cute little nursery for my unborn child, whom I had recently learnt was a baby girl, that I was going to call Sienna. I'm not an interfering woman by any manner of means, nor do I like to interfere or meddle in my husband's affairs, but after seeing him in such a stressed-out state, I knew I invariably needed to do something about it. I couldn't sit back and watch him wearing himself into the ground like this. I knew my regular rendezvous at the trendy little coffee shop on 2nd Avenue was what was needed to get some sound advice from my sagacious friends. Here in Seattle we're big coffee enthusiasts. Seattle is a world centre for coffee drinking, so we pretty much consider ourselves connoisseurs when it comes to indulging in the rich, aromatic, high-caffeine beverage. "Oh, there she is at last," said my friend Erica, when I made my appearance at the quaint little coffee shop, with their nifty tables swathed in red and white checkered tablecloths clustered together in an alfresco French style, rather reminding me of the charming little coffee shops in Paris, with the flamboyant, warm, congenial uptown atmosphere. My 2 friends were seated cosily at a table for our weekly gathering. I enjoyed these little tete-a-tetes. I was holding my stomach awkwardly as I approached the table, ever grateful to sink into a seat, audibly sighing as my derriere rested on the comfortable upholstered chair. It was good to get my feet off the ground. "Are you all right, Sasha? You look like you have the weight of the world on your shoulders." "More like my shoulders and my belly," I joked. "So what's troubling you? You look flustered. It's not good for the baby, you know, to be so stressed out like this," said Erica, looking rather concerned. "Do you know they say that babies can feel if a mother is strained?" I grabbed my stomach, holding it protectively. "It's a combination of things. It's nausea, and my incessant worrying about James." Erica raised a quizzical brow. "Why are you worried about James?" she asked. "If you must know, his boss is only piling on the work like there's no tomorrow. I've seen how exhausted and frazzled he's become, working the craziest, most unreasonable hours. It's ludicrous. If I had my way, I'd wring his boss's neck for working him like a donkey. Sometimes it seems like he's miles away. Other times he's peevish and crabby. He'll snap at me for no reason at all. You know what James is like. He's normally such a relaxed soul. Not these days. Something's really irking him." "That's not right. It's not healthy for you, nor for James or your unborn baby to be living in such a pressurized environment," said Erica. "Has he spoken to his boss? Told him that he's a slave driver? It's not reasonable for him to be working at home." I sighed. You know how James is. He's very conscientious and driven, far too polite to ruffle his boss's feathers. I know he'll just grin and get on with it, but I can see he's worn to a frazzle. "Why don't you tell him you think your husband is burning the candle at both ends, that perhaps he might consider reducing the workload?" "You think I can do that?" I asked. I hardly want to come across as the intrusive busybody interfering wife, sticking my nose where it doesn't belong. "Do you know his boss?" Alicia asked me. "Of course I know him. I've been to a couple of formal work dinners with him and his wife Diane. They're a very nice couple, actually. My impression of Marcus is he's a decent person. He seemed terribly nice to me. I'm not sure in hindsight that he's so reasonable, given how hard he's working my husband." "Well, there you go then. You have an absolute right to approach him on friendly terms, as a dutiful, solicitous wife. You can tell him that you're increasingly worried about your husband's welfare, that his workload has become increasingly objectionable. I mean, what harm can it possibly do?" I knew Alicia was absolutely right, so I swiftly made an appointment to see my husband's boss privately at 9:30 the following morning. I'd just have to hope the appointment would be very discreet, that my husband wouldn't receive wind of it. If he knew I was secretly going behind his back, arranging meetings with his boss, he would be more than a little humiliated. I knew my husband was not himself of late. I assured myself I only had his best interests at heart. I couldn't just sit back and watch him fall apart before my very eyes. The following morning I was ushered into Marcus Sutcliffe's reception area by his accommodating receptionist Liesl Gray, that recognised me instantly as James's wife. "Hello, Sasha! Oh, it's so great to see you! What are you doing here? This is a lovely surprise." "Oh, you know, I'm checking in on my husband, but I would appreciate it if you don't tell him about my assembly with your boss. It might just upset him." "Of course I won't. It's good to see you, Sasha. Pregnancy suits you. You're positively glowing." "Thanks. I don't really feel it. I'm exhausted. I'm suffering from continuous nausea." "Oh, you poor thing. My sister was exactly like that, as sick as a dog throughout her entire pregnancy." "Oh, there we go," she said. At the precise moment the beeper on the phone lit up with a red light, which she answered, while her keen eyes remained fixed on me. "Yes, Marcus, she's here. Shall I send her in then?" She looked up at me. "Marcus will see you now, Sasha," she said, putting down the receiver whilst mouthing, "Good luck." Marcus Sutcliffe was sitting at his gleaming mahogany desk when I walked into his office. He was a smart, handsome man, fastidiously turned out in a pinstriped suit, with a sleek head of dark cropped hair, and brown kind eyes that were discerning and astute. He stood up upon seeing me with a broad grin on his face, then came over to me, kissing me effusively on both cheeks, his gaze dropping curiously to my pregnant belly. "Hello, Sasha! Not long now," he said, looking at me brightly. "I think James was saying you only have 3 months left before the world is dramatically changed for the both of you, with a little pitter-patter of tiny feet and lots of sleepless nights, if I'm not mistaken. Enjoy the peace while you still get it. Believe me, I know all about it." "I'm looking forward to it being all over, I must admit. I'm not going to kid. What they don't tell you about pregnancy is that your mind becomes like jello. Sometimes it's hard to even think straight. I've even become very clumsy. I'm always breaking things. It drives James quite mad." "My wife said the very same thing when she was pregnant with Candace. She kept saying her mind had turned to marshmallow," he said, gesturing for me to take a seat. "So what do I owe this unexpected surprise?" he asked, looking at me earnestly. "It's about my husband James." "I thought as much," he said, raising a curious brow. "Is everything all right at home?" "No, not really. I feel James is working far too hard." Marcus looked puzzled. "I was thinking he looked rather drained the other day, I have to say. I thought it was all about the excitement of having an upcoming baby on the way. Why do you think he's working too hard, Sasha?" "I was hoping you could tell me that, Marcus. I notice he has so much overtime to do when he returns home every evening. Sometimes he's cracking the whip at both ends at 12 o'clock at night. He says he's inundated and swamped by the workload. I was hoping you could reduce it a little. He's utterly exhausted, overwhelmed by it all, to be perfectly honest with you. Actually, I'm growing increasingly concerned about his health." Marcus looked perturbed. "I don't give any of my staff overtime, Sasha. I'm a firm believer that when they leave the building, they leave their work behind with them. Whatever your husband has been doing, it hasn't been overtime on my account. I can assure you of that." This time it was my turn to look bewildered. I could feel my cheeks burning red with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry, Marcus," I stammered. "I had absolutely no idea. That wasn't the impression James gave me at all. I seem to have got my wires crossed. I really do apologise." "Well, it might be a good idea to ask him what's going on," said Marcus, running his hands pensively through his brown hair. "I mean, his work here is slacking a little, if I'm being brutally honest with you. I think something is clearly bothering him. Even I have noticed his demeanour lately. He's not himself. He's become quite crotchety and grumpy. I've been rather concerned about him. He seems unusually tense, rather on edge." "I've noticed that too," I said. "That's why I came to see you." "I'll get to the bottom of this," I assured Marcus. "Thanks so much for seeing me. I'm sorry to have taken up your valuable time like this." "It's only a pleasure, Sasha. It's been lovely to see you again. I hope you get to the bottom of this enigmatic situation with your husband." I walked away from that office, my head a complete whirl. I felt more than a little humiliated, pleading James' case for him, only to find my husband had been lying to me. He was working at something behind my back that was draining and sucking the life out of him. But the question was what? When I returned home, I was all guns blazing. I was quite literally ready to declare World War III on my husband. But things didn't pan out quite as I was anticipating, as invariably they never ever do. I was to discover James sitting at the walnut kitchen table, in one hell of a state. I'd never seen my husband look like this before. I could see his olive-skinned face was as white as a sheet. His jaw had tightened significantly, while his eyes darted around the kitchen like an anxious ferret. "What on earth is wrong?" I asked him, forgetting completely about how mad I was with him, as an anxious concern now swept over me. "James, you're scaring the hell out of me. You look like you've been to the doctor's office today, and he's announced you've only got 2 months left to live with an inoperable form of brain cancer. What's going on?" My husband brushed his hand over his mouth. "You're barking up the wrong tree there, Munchkin. But what I've got to tell you is very bad." I stared at my husband, feeling my heart pounding in my chest as I virtually gulped the air. "You've got something bad to tell me? How bad?" "Now you really are scaring me." "Very bad." "Oh my God, what have you done?" "I've done something very, very stupid. Insanely stupid. You're not going to be happy with me at all, Sasha." "Go on," I said, feeling the nausea welling up in the back of my throat as I clutched my stomach tightly. Hearing my husband's unsavoury announcement was certainly ensuring my nausea was escalating at an alarming rate. In truth, I felt like throwing up violently, but I resisted the temptation by shifting in my seat, trying to remain very still. "I've got myself in a little pickle over the last few months, I'm afraid. I've borrowed a sizable amount of money from a loan shark. He's expecting it back with a ludicrous amount of interest by the end of this month. If I don't pay it back, there's going to be hell to pay. And I don't say that lightly." "What kind of trouble are you talking about?" This time it was my face that was growing an ashen white, as I tried to comprehend my husband's disquieting words. "Let's just say that I don't want to find out. I don't want to sugarcoat anything. We're in a big mess, Sasha. This loan shark, his name is Joel Bloomberg. He's not a good person. He has a baleful, fearsome reputation of making people who don't pay him back disappear off the face of the earth, never ever to be seen again. There are all kinds of speculative, foreboding rumours about him. No one can prove a single thing, of course. They never can with people like him. He covers his tracks seamlessly. He's been investigated by the police numerous times, but they can never pin a thing on him. But let's just say this, he has a merciless reputation. He's ruthless, aggressive, downright dangerous. I gasped. Why would you deal with someone like that? Oh my God, what are we going to do? This is absolutely terrible. That's it. We're going to have to get away from here. Leave our lives behind in Seattle. Move somewhere where we can live undercover. We can try and assume different identities. Give ourselves different names. I'll have to find a cash-in-hand job so that we do not leave behind a paper trail of any kind, as this man will find us, if we don't watch our backs, of course. How much money do you owe this money lender? You don't want to know. How much? I need to know. You can't keep this kind of stuff from me. I'm your wife, for goodness sake. I deserve to know the truth. It's not good for your pregnancy. You don't want to stress yourself out. You could get preeclampsia. You know what the doctor said. It's easy for stress to exacerbate high blood pressure in pregnancy. I think it's a bit late for that. I'm already stressing out, so you better tell me, and tell me now. $300,000. $300,000? How the hell are we going to afford to pay that back? By the end of the month? We can't. There's no way we can. It's not remotely possible. I don't understand, James. How did you get to borrow $300,000? Tell me that. Who lends that kind of money? It's obscene. What on earth were you thinking? Why on earth would you do something like this? We haven't got the capacity to pay back that kind of money. You know we haven't. I don't think I could even ask my parents to raise that cash on a whim for us, even if I begged them to help us out. Besides, I'd never dream of asking them for money like that. What on earth did you spend it on? I've got a problem with gambling. I gambled all our savings away online. I thought I could make it big for us. I really did. I got carried away, Sasha. I did first win over $80,000. I got excited about that. Then I lost it all. I thought it would change our lives. There were these gambling sites online, free opportunities to have a go. I guess I got hooked, reeled in. Surely you know those things are rigged. Doesn't everybody know that? I guess that explains why you've been tapping away at your cell phone every night until the early hours of the morning. You've been gambling while I wrongly assumed Marcus was working you like a dog. More fool me. I feel like a prize idiot for not guessing what was going on. But lately with my pregnancy, I've had cauliflower growing between my ears. I'm really sorry, Sasha. I don't blame you for any of this. It's all my fault. I take full responsibility. I got carried away. There's no excuse for what I've done. No, there isn't. I feel sick to my stomach, James. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. My tears were dry. I wanted to feel something, but I couldn't either. I was numb. I didn't feel anything at all. Instead, I stared blankly into space as I tried to assimilate the full gravity of what my husband was telling me. I wasn't even angry with him. I was too worn out to be angry, too stunned, disorientated, confused to make any sense of any of this at all. Please tell me this is a nightmare, I thought to myself, that I'm going to wake up from it any time soon. My husband was inadvertently telling me that we needed to disappear, that if he didn't pay the loan shark back, that something quite terrible was likely to happen to him, which left me with a hollow pit in the bottom of my gut. How the hell did we get entangled in a mess like this? Was this not the sort of thing that happened to other people? Not a mediocre run-of-the-mill couple like us that lived in a leafy green Seattle neighbourhood. Say something, Sasha, said my husband. Are you going to leave me? Leave you? I said, raising a brow. I think you've forgotten, James, that I'm actually your wife. I'm carrying our baby. I love you. We're embroiled in this mess together, whether you like it or not. Yes, I'm not happy with what you've done. Not happy at all. I should be screaming my lungs out, calling you every obscenity on the earth, and accusing you of ruining our lives. But in truth, I'm too shell-shocked to react. You've been a prize idiot, but I'm your wife. I'm not going to desert you, just because the going gets tough. Isn't that what marriages are about? Staying together in sickness and health? What you did was seriously sick in the head, but it's water under the bridge now. I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to leave me. I squandered everything. I've messed up big time. You've messed up, but I'm not going to leave you. But you can't gamble anymore. You've got to stop, James. Otherwise, this addiction of yours is literally going to destroy our lives and our baby's future. You've already blown our savings from what you're telling me. We virtually have no money left in the bank, which might explain why on Tuesday my card was refused at the checkout. I thought you'd forgotten to put in the funds to my account. Luckily, I had some cash to get myself out of that prickly predicament. I just wish you'd told me sooner that you were having problems. We could have nipped this in the bud. You could have got yourself some professional help. I know, you're absolutely right. But the question is, what are we going to do? We barely have any money. Can you not call the police, James, I ask, knowing full well what my husband's answer to that would be. No way. You can't call the police on thugs like this. That would make things 1,000 times worse for us. Me and my husband talked diligently to the early hours of the morning, deciding what course of action we were going to take. We needed to disappear, but vanishing is never easy. I knew that there are people in Japan known as the jujitsu, which is a Japanese word for evaporation, when people deliberately decide to disappear from their own lives on purpose, seemingly vanishing into thin air. They leave their homes, their jobs, and their families, sometimes not being seen for decades. There are even companies you can hire in Japan to help you disappear in the middle of the night, without a trace. Abused women running away from husbands, or people leaving stressed jobs or abusive families, or even running away to escape their own lives. In our case, we were running away from an evil debt collector, who more than likely would cause my husband seriously bodily harm, or, dare I say, even kill him. Of course, I didn't articulate those very words. They remained unspoken between us, but we were both thinking them. I knew that, like those individuals in Japan, we needed to vanish off the face of the earth, without leaving a single trace. We had to assume new identities, and this was not going to be easy. But then I had a great idea. I phoned my best friend using a burner phone, so hopefully the call wouldn't be traced. Melinda Beckingsdale parents lived on a farm in West Virginia, which was a sizable 36 hours away from Seattle. They often needed help on their farm. Furthermore, they had a little cottage where we might be able to live on the land. I decided to give her a call. Melinda, it's Sasha. Oh my God, Sasha, is that you? It's been forever. I haven't seen you in an age. How are you doing? Not so well, I'm afraid. I've got myself in a spot of bother. Or rather, should I say, James has. He's got us into the trouble, which is an understatement, actually. Oh no! What happened? Are you all right? Is there anything I can possibly do? Well, there is. Do your parents perhaps need a hand on their farm? Is their cottage available? I remember you saying they were always looking out for help on the farm. Melinda chuckled. You know them, Sasha. They always need help. They're very selective, of course, about where they get that help from. You know them, they're so private. As it happens, the cottage is free. Are you wanting to move in? If you help them on the farm, you can have it rent-free, no problems, and they'll pay you cash in hand for any work you do. I guess it's what you're looking for in the circumstances. Besides, I'm sure they'd be so delighted to have you two around. What on earth is going on? I'd love to help, Sasha. It's complicated. The less you know, the better. Don't be silly, Sasha. Let me help. I'd like to help in any way that I can. If the boot was on the other foot, you wouldn't hesitate to help me either. Well, my husband's in trouble with a very formidable loan shark, who's a slippery, shady character, if ever I saw one. He's demanding James to pay him $300,000 by the end of the month, or else. I don't even want to imagine what else means, but let's just say it's an unarticulated, deadly threat. There's no way on this earth that James can pay that kind of money back. So we have to vanish off the face of the earth so that this unscrupulous, corrupt character doesn't actually find us. If you get on his wrong side, you don't pay him back. He has a habit of making his clients disappear for good, never to be seen ever again, if you get my drift. It's terrifying stuff. The man is treacherous. You've got to be kidding, Sasha. That is terrible. I've heard stories about unethical loan sharks before that would make your hair curl. You need to watch your back, Sasha. Both of you do. Those people have no scruples, no moral compass, no sense of decency whatsoever. They charge obscene amounts of interest, and they can really be so dangerous. Why does your husband James owe them so much? A gambling addiction, would you believe it? I didn't even know about it. I naively thought he was working overtime when he was spending all his time gambling online. I can't believe that I was so ignorant at failing to see what was going on under my very nose. Oh my goodness, that's so bad, Sasha. I'm sorry. Gambling addiction is a huge problem. Those online sites are a hell of a temptation for any addict. I remember going to a casino once, seeing people throwing their life savings down the plug hole. It's desperately sad. Some of them look like such lost souls. It just breaks your heart. Are you sure, Melinda, that your parents will be agreeable for us to live in their cottage? We would earn our keep, we really would. We desperately need a change of address and a way to make a living indefinitely so that we can keep under the radar. We'll do absolutely anything. Don't you worry your cotton socks, Sasha. It's all sorted out. I'll speak to my folks for you. My parents would simply love having you staying there. I'll tell them to keep their mouths shut about your presence on their property. Not that you need to worry. They're not exactly garrulous. Are you sure I can't try and raise that money that you owe for you? But to get hold of that money, I will need a couple of weeks first. Melinda, I can't ask you to do that. That would be crazy. It's good of you to offer, though. I'd love to accept your offer, though, of living on the farm in your cottage, if you're sure we won't be an imposition. Of course you won't be. I'm so glad to be able to help. I know my parents will be over the moon having that extra help with harvesting peaches and apples and dealing with the rotational corn crops. You'll be a godsend to them. They'll appreciate the extra help on the farm, and the good company, of course. I don't know what to say. You're a gem. You've quite literally saved our lives. It's no trouble, Sasha. I know if I was in the same kind of pickle, you would do the same for me. How's your pregnancy going, by the way? I'm 6 months gone. I'm suffering from the most horrendous morning sickness. This pregnancy hasn't been easy. You poor, poor thing. This is all you need to be moving away when you're so heavily pregnant. But still needs must. You must be as mad as hell with James for letting you down like this. You know, I possibly should be, Melinda, but frankly, I'm too shattered to be angry. Pregnancy just drains you so much. I felt so relieved after speaking to Melinda. I knew she would come through for us. She'd always been a great friend of mine. Before long, my husband and I made plans to disappear in the middle of the night, to make the long drawn-out drive to West Virginia, which was going to be a 36-hour trip. We had informed our landlord we were leaving her fully furnished apartment, while James had spoken to his boss, given his notice. Marcus was sorry to see him go, but very understanding, promising to keep his mouth firmly shut. I had decided not to say goodbyes to any of my girlfriends, as the less people that knew about our vanishing plan, the better. We could not afford to be too careful. It was very distressing to leave my life behind in Seattle, to not contact any of my friends. I managed to sell my car to raise some much-needed available cash. We were well on our way. We closed our bank accounts, bought several burner phones without internet connections, got rid of our original cell phones, as they can so easily be traced. Besides, without an internet connection, my husband James would be forced to go cold turkey. Hopefully we could say goodbye to his online addiction, although ideally he really did require professional help. But being on the run, we weren't in the position of acquiring it for him. I would speak to my parents on a burner phone once a month. As they lived in Atlanta, they wouldn't have a clue that we were no longer in Seattle. The less they knew about our plans, the better. I didn't want to embroil them in our fiasco, cause them undue stress. As they were already dealing with a plethora of health issues, I didn't want to add stress to the equation. James and I woke up at about 1 o'clock in the morning on the day we were leaving. We packed all our worldly possessions in the back of our truck. I physically went out into the street to check that there were no suspicious cars, secretly keeping watch over our home, as you can never be too sure of the lengths a debt collector would be prepared to go to. It had come to my attention during the day that a black BMW had been following me around town, so I was fully aware I was being watched by these insidious characters. I felt reasonably confident that no one was watching our house right now. The quiet street appeared sleepy, with not a solitary soul in sight. All that greeted me was a Seattle cool breeze. A few of the oak trees swayed their branches in the wind, while the street lights lit up the dark, shadowy corners. I really did feel satisfied that we were safe to leave and make our hasty escape, like two fugitives on the run from the police. Needless to say, the long journey in our truck was exhausting for a pregnant woman, so we did make a couple of stopovers at bed and breakfasts on the way, where we paid cash in hand for our overnight stops, where we were privileged to stay with a couple of delightful couples who made us cordially welcome in their homes and luckily didn't ask too many probing questions. Wherever we went, I knew we would never be able to fully relax. We had to be vigilant about every move we made, as anyone could be watching us from the shadows. Finally, we found ourselves only minutes away from Melinda's parents' farm. The relief I felt was immeasurable, as being cooped up in the truck for so long had been a disagreeable experience for a normal functioning adult, but for a pregnant woman it had been completely insufferable. Sadly, we couldn't risk taking a short flight to Virginia, which would have been infinitely more preferable, but would have left behind a paper trail. Besides, we needed my husband's truck. I was hoping that we had left no record of ourselves that could be uncovered by those nefarious loan sharks who were not prepared to accept monthly instalments and were charging a ludicrous amount of interest on my husband's loan, which was nothing short of criminal extortion. We really had no choice but to disappear. "Well, you'll be glad to know, Sasha, we're nearly there. I can hardly wait," my husband exclaimed. "Oh, I am glad," I said, sighing with relief. "I can't wait to stretch my weary legs." We had driven off the interstate and were now driving in rugged countryside, surrounded by tall statuesque trees on high embankments, sporadically passing farmers' fields of corn, barley, wheat or tobacco. Before long we drove down a bumpy road that was shaped like a crooked finger. It may well have been asphalt at one time, but it was crumbled and worn away, heavily overgrown by weeds. We took a few swift turns and finally saw a signpost to Honeybrook Farm. We were soon driving down an earthen country road that led to a large black iron gate that was left wide open for us. I could see a dilapidated sign attached to the iron bars that had been worn away by the weather, saying Honeybrook Farm. It appeared really rather rusty. We drove past orchards of apples and peach trees, a field of corn and a meadow with a couple of horses frolicking away happily and grazing in a field. Finally, we arrived at the breathtakingly beautiful farmhouse nestled in the heart of the valley, surrounded by masterful, imposing backdrops of mountains that dappled the furthest horizon in a hazy purple hue. The rear of the property was heavily fringed by a vast, resplendent, impressive-looking wood grove made up of mature statuesque oak and maple trees. The farmhouse itself was a double-storey symmetrical affair, a vast red brick building, with large sash windows and matching black shutters, a grey slate roof and a wraparound porch on the lowest elevation, framed by ornate columns that led directly to the front door. I could see a man with a full thatch of thick white hair, wearing a blue plaid shirt and jeans, dashing down the steps, ambling hurriedly towards us as we parked our truck on the red brick driveway. "Come on in," he said, opening the truck door and shaking my husband's hand profusely while giving him a friendly thump on the back. "It's very good to meet you. You must be James. Melinda has told me all about you. My name is Clive. I'm Melinda's father." "Pleased to meet you, Clive," said my husband, giving the man a big grin. Clive bounded over to my side of the truck, opening the door for me. I was well acquainted with the jovial farmer, thanks to my long-standing friendship with his daughter Melinda. Clive looked remarkably good for a man in his late 60s, as with the exception of his thick white hair, he didn't look a day over 40. I thought it must be the fresh air and exercise that kept him in such good nick. He did not appear to have succumbed to the pear-shaped effects of gravity that affect so many. I secretly hoped that I could age this gracefully. "It's so good to see you, Sasha," he said, giving me a warm, affectionate hug and glancing down at my huge belly. "Melinda told me you were heavily pregnant. When is it due?" "I'm due in 3 months," I said. "Oh, it'll be exciting having a baby around the place. Hetty would love to do some babysitting for you, I'm sure. She adores babies. You two must come in at once. Have some refreshments before I take you up to the cottage." As if on cue, Hetty came rushing out of the house, oscillating her arms excitedly in effusive dramatic gestures that displayed her enthusiasm to see us. Her heavily lined face breaking out into a broad beam. She was a bubbly woman in her early 60s, slightly rounded around the hips, with a full head of short grey hair that had been stylishly cut in a way that made her appear elegant and younger in years. Her 2 large black rambunctious Labradors did not relinquish their enthusiasm either. They'd been trained not to jump up on strangers, but that did not stop them from showering us with a gleeful welcome, which included thumping their tails on the ground and letting out a couple of exuberant woofs. "Please come in," she said, giving me a big hug and offering me an expressive explanation at the size of my bump. "Do you mind?" she said, putting her hand on my stomach. "May I have a feel?" "Of course," I said. Hetty led us to her gorgeous country-style kitchen. It was incredibly stunning. very stylish, with white cabinetry, white quartz surfaces, and it gleamed. There was also a flagstone floor. The kitchen door overlooked a sizable backyard, where she grew all the family vegetables, from squashes, tomatoes to spinach and lettuce. I could see dozens of free-range hens meandering through the vegetable beds, gleaming worms for themselves. It really felt as if we were in the south of France. It had that quintessential rustic feel about it. "Now you sit down, please," said Hetty, insisting I get my legs up. "You must both be so exhausted after your trip," she said, bustling around and putting a large kettle onto the gas hob of her range. "I think some tea's in order, don't you?" "Sounds lovely," I said. "I mean to say, Hetty, thank you so much for letting us move into your cottage. Melinda explained to us that you need a fresh start to keep a low profile. Frankly, you couldn't have chosen a better place than our home to hide out in. This is quite a sanctuary we have here. I think you should feel very safe. Besides, I'm sure Heath will keep a good eye on you. He can be a grumpy old man at times, but his heart's in the right place. He's very, very protective. He'll definitely have your backs, and that makes me feel very assured." So this is part 1 of our story. We will continue tomorrow night with part 2. I'm afraid it's a very long story, so that's why I've had to separate it into 2 sections. Until next time, goodbye and good night.